Good afternoon. My name is Mary Docken, Vice President of Outreach at IntelliSpark, and on behalf of IntelliSpark and School Counselor Central, I am just delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on supporting students with anxiety and fatigue. The well-being of students is central to our work at IntelliSpark, and we believe student support is a team sport, and that kids thrive when they're known, appreciated, and supported. IntelliSpark is an innovative technology platform that combines quick check surveys, positive feedback, and team collaboration tools that help you support each and every student. We're working with over 300 schools across the country and want to extend an invitation to you to join us at no cost with IntelliSpark Starter Edition. You can visit intellispark.com and request an account for your school. Anna Duvall and Dr. Crissy Roddy are our guests today for this discussion on supporting students with anxiety and fatigue. Anna is the School Counselor and Career Specialist Liaison for the South Carolina Department of Education. She's served 26 years as a professional school counselor in both the middle and high school settings. Crissy is in her 9th year as the director at White Knoll High School in Lexington, South Carolina. Known for their proactive approach in working with students, data-driven curriculum, and student-centered practices, they've recently co-authored a book on managing anxiety in school settings, creating a survival toolkit for students, and are frequent presenters on this topic. As students return to in-person learning this fall, there are widespread concerns regarding the student support needed for students to feel that they belong to their school community and are engaged in their learning. Anticipating the anxiety and fatigue that many students may have as they return to school, we're excited to welcome Anna and Crissy to discuss this critical and timely topic. Just a few details before we get started. The format for today's webinar will be a chat amongst colleagues. Excuse me. We've prepared some questions for Anna and Crissy on the topic of student anxiety and fatigue. To begin the conversation, I invite you to share the questions you may have utilizing the Q&A. You are also welcome to share comments via the chat box. Although we're not physically in a room together, we're excited that you've joined us for this conversation. One of my colleagues will be assisting us today and will post some poll questions, as well as provide you with information and resources in the chat box, such as how you can connect with Crissy and Anna and IntelliSpark. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you along with a certificate of attendance. We hope you will share the recording with colleagues who were unable to attend today. Finally, to help spread the word about the fantastic book Anna and Crissy have authored on today's topic, for those that request an IntelliSpark account no later than this Friday, July 2nd, your name will be entered into a drawing to receive a complimentary copy of their book, Managing Anxiety in School Settings. And with that, let's begin the conversation. Anna and Crissy, I am delighted to be here with you today. Welcome.
Thank you, Mary, for having us. Crissy and I are thrilled to be here. Looking in the chat box, and all my friends from South Carolina representing as well. Glad y'all are here as well. So we're just ready to go, ready to get started.
Great. Well, I want to start, Anna, and pose the first question to you. I'd love to know what motivated you to write this book together, and were there specific incidents or students that inspired you both to write this book?
Well, Crissy Roddy and I have been presenting on anxiety for a while. We actually started presenting on self-care for school counselors. But then we were asked if we could do presentations from the student perspective. And of course, we said yes. So we were at a presentation at one of the American School Counselor Association annual conferences. And after that presentation, we were approached by a publishing company who said, hey, we don't have a lot of books in this area, and we think what you just did would make a great book. And Crissy and I both went, really? Because writing a book was not on our radar. But then we started to look around, and we saw that although there were a lot of books on anxiety and student anxiety, there weren't a lot of practical books. We know school counselors wear so many different hats in the building. One minute you may be working with a student with anxiety, and the very next minute you may be deciding if this credit counts as an English or an elective.
Right.
You just go in so many different directions. It's very helpful to have something you can pick up when a student with anxiety comes in and use. So we didn't see a lot out there. So Crissy and I decided that's what we were going to do. And throughout the book, you hear from a student called Anxious Annie. And Anxious Annie was one of our students. A real student. Those are real quotes from Annie. So I think Annie started the whole ball rolling with us. But as we knew we were going to be authoring the book, we started keeping notes of actual students' quotes, what they used to address their anxiety, and we started keeping lists. So when you read the book, a lot of the examples are true. All of the examples are true examples of working with students. Now, Crissy and I work in high schools. So some of the middle school students may not have been our particular students, might have been, I don't know, children. I don't know. Or it might be from other colleagues. But the book, we wanted it to be all-inclusive from elementary all the way to high school and post-secondary. So it's just, we knew that our colleagues had a need for something they could pick up and use immediately. And we wanted to fill that need. So that's what sparked us to write the book. And then all the students we've worked with over the last few years. And I would like to say the book was written pre-pandemic. So I'm looking at the book now and thinking, wow, it really holds true now. So that's what got us started. And there are several students that actually in the dedication in the book, we dedicate it to all the students who've allowed us to help them on their journey, because if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have the book.
Well, I think that's wonderful. And, one of the things that we talk about at IntelliSpark is the importance of knowing each and every student. And every student has their own story. And whether they're challenged with anxiety or whatever it may be, that's so critical. So to know that those are real life examples, I think brings great meaning to those of us that are able to enjoy and read and put into practice that resource. Crissy, I want to direct the next question to you and just say, are there some telltale signs of a student experiencing anxiety as you think about your work? Are there some things that you would point to that could be helpful for our discussion today?
Definitely. It's a yes and no answer to that question, because some students will not show you at all that they have any symptoms. They will just shut down, and that really is their symptom. But we see a lot of different symptoms at different ages, and really at different developmental levels. You might see different behaviors manifesting themselves. So with younger students, like elementary age kids, you might see things like separation anxiety, where they don't want to leave their parent, or they have stomach aches, headaches. They feel really tired. They're not sleeping well. They're going to the restroom a lot. So they may not know how to verbalize really yet what it is they're feeling and what that anxiety is doing to them. So physically, they may respond with a lot of other behaviors that really don't say I'm anxious, but they kind of say I'm anxious. We might also see with those students, they may cry a lot. They may be very, very sensitive. And again, with that separation anxiety, they just really might have tantrums. They might fidget a lot. They might look like a kid who maybe has ADHD, or a kid who is misbehaving. A lot of misbehavior is actually anxiety, but a lot of students don't know how to verbalize that. So it just comes out in a lot of other ways. And then emotionally, a lot of those students really have low self-esteem. They may have a really hard time making and keeping friends because it's easier to just kind of shut down than to open up and say, I'm having these problems. As students get older, when they reach into middle school, you might see more of those behaviors geared or kind of shoved out towards other people. So that misbehavior might be really magnified because, again, in addition to anxiety, you're throwing puberty and adolescence in there, which is the perfect storm of intensity and struggle for a student with anxiety. So in middle school, it really is magnified, and that behavior may just start to increase in a lot of negative ways. Their academics may really start to take a dip. And unfortunately, it's happening at younger and younger ages. We've seen it a lot with students with anxiety in the high school level, but we're seeing it in middle school now too, is students who might have suicidal ideation. They might start trying different vaping, alcohol, drugs, things that they think are going to help relieve their anxiety and their stress, but it really only serves to increase those things. So it really shows itself in a lot of different ways. And unfortunately, while we can check boxes and say that this is one thing or it's not, it's going to show itself emotionally, behaviorally, physically, different ways for different students. So I think it's really important that we in the education profession really kind of keep our eyes open and see not just what's in front of us, but what might also be going on beneath the surface for our students.
I think that's really important. And having, had the privilege to work in a school, I concur with what you're, saying. And one of the things I would just be curious is, do you encounter also students that look like they're doing really well, but actually they are suffering from anxiety, but you don't see the symptoms? I would just be curious.
We do, absolutely. And really, some of those high-flying students are sometimes some of the most anxious students we see. And again, they may present as this well-put-together young lady, young man. They may be making all of the perfect test scores in AP classes, or they might be in the gifted and talented program. They may be in extracurricular activities. And so there may be some positive outlets, but no one is harder on an anxious student than themselves. And that is where they internalize a lot of it. And it may start to show up as an eating disorder because they have to find some kind of control in their lives. And so they look to other things to make that situation better. And those students may never come in and see their school counselor. And we may have no idea what's going on. And their parents may be completely clueless, but they are struggling and just falling apart on the inside.
Well, and just to mention, one of the tools that we've developed are what we call quick check surveys for that very purpose, for grades to be able to ask students questions that they might respond to, or hopefully will respond to, that would give you an indication of maybe they seem to be doing well, but really they aren't doing well. And so I think it's important to find ways to do that. One of the things, and I know I do this myself, we sometimes think stress and anxiety are really one and the same. And, are they one and the same, or do you differentiate them and think about them differently?
Well, if you go on WebMD, you absolutely have anxiety, and you probably have
all of it.
The other thing that you're about to die from. So don't go on WebMD.
Don't go on WebMD.
Don't go on WebMD ever. And doctors hate when you tell them that too. But in reality, there is a huge difference between stress and anxiety. And a lot of people assume one is the other, or they assume if I'm stressed, I have anxiety, or if I have anxiety, I have panic attacks, or if I have panic attacks, I must be going crazy and I'm going to die. So there's kind of this continuum. And on one end of it is stress. Everybody gets stressed. We have good stress. We have negative stress. It's part of our lives. It's part of the animal kingdom. It's part of everything we do every day. Now, a good stress might be that you are a student who plays a sport and you have a big competition coming up, or you're getting ready to run in your event in the track and field category, and you're really, really nervous and stressed out before that event. That's fine. That's a positive stress. It's going to motivate you. You're going to do a great job. And then when the event is over, that stress is gone. So it's temporary. It's not something that lasts. Once the event is done that is bringing you the stress, then you're okay. There are negative stressors, like maybe you're really worried because the student has a test coming up, or maybe if you're like me, I don't like to fly. So I get stressed before I get on an airplane. Sorry, Anna, she's flown with me before, so she's had to deal with me. But once I get on the plane, I'm fine. Or when I land, I'm fine. So that stressor ends. Now, that is a huge defining line between stress and anxiety. When we start to cross over to anxiety, that is when people keep feeling anxious even once the event is over. So if I was someone who had anxiety and I was afraid to fly, I'm not just worried and a little nervous before the flight. It is a month before the flight, and I'm already starting to check the weather. I'm checking statistics on how many people die in plane crashes. I'm looking up emergency plans for what I do if the plane crashes over water. I am losing sleep. I'm worrying, overly so, excessively so, before the event has ever happened. And then once the plane lands safely and I'm on the ground, I'm still really, really keyed up. I'm still really worried. I'm still anxious. And so what is natural in nature when we see fight or flight in animals, that's stress happening. The animal perceives that there's a threat. They can choose to freeze, they can take flight, or they can fight. With humans, with anxiety, they feel that they are under attack, and that threat is there all the time, whether it's real or perceived. So that person who worries about flying in a plane, or that student with anxiety, is nervous well beyond the time frame of a normal stressor. So they worry a lot about the what ifs. So it's not just what is happening. I have a test, or I have to give a presentation in class. It's all the things that could go wrong up until that test, and all the things that can go wrong after that test. And unfortunately, when a student has anxiety, or anybody, it is a continuous loop that does not stop. So that really is a huge dividing line between your average stress that we all have, and then crossing over into anxiety, which is much, much more involved and long lasting.
And I'd like to follow up on that.
Sure.
Not only is it affecting the way we think, it's also affecting our bodies. So when you finish the stressful situation, your body goes, and your body can get back to a normal state. When you have anxiety, your body never gets that relaxation. It never gets to resume back to a normal state. And it's like Crissy said, it's just that spiral that keeps going around and around. I guess that's not a spiral, that's a circle. Spiral will go down. But they never get off the merry-go-round. Their bodies never get a chance to relax. I think that's a big point here. It's not just in your head. It's also, like I said, in your head, in your heart, in your body. You just never get a chance to relax and recover from that feeling of, what am I going to do? Am I going to run? Am I going to freeze? Am I going to fight it out? So I think that's an important part as well.
And Anna, to piggyback on that, you brought up a great point. And I'm not going to be super scientific, but with anxiety, the chemicals are not the way they are for a person who's just dealing with stress. The cortisol levels are not where they should be. And so that person really continues to feel very physically out of sorts, like you said, once that stressor is gone. And that balance doesn't just right itself. And for some people, it happens so frequently that they feel like they are full of anxiety all of the time. And so what may have started as a fear of flying turns into anxiety about going to the grocery store, being in crowds. And for students, it can start with, I'm really anxious about presenting in class, to I'm really anxious about walking in the classroom. I'm anxious about even walking in the door to the school. So it can really increase exponentially the more physically someone feels it.
Well, and this is a kind of a segue then, and Anne, I want to direct this to you about, what are some of the common themes and elements as you think about student anxiety and how in your career you've supported them? Like, what are some of those methods or manners in which you've supported students or recommend people to think about?
Okay. And I'm going to use the term BC in a very different way before COVID. So let's talk BC for a moment. I think before COVID, what I noticed was students who had anxiety felt like they were the only person in the whole wide world who had it. They felt very isolated. They felt that everyone was staring at them when they were having these feelings of anxiety and what am I going to do? They really felt exposed and they felt alone. And before COVID, if they were the freeze people, the fight, flight, and freeze, if they were the freeze people, we never knew about them because they froze right in their spot and never asked for help. If they're the fight folks, the fight students, those are the ones that got in trouble. Those were the ones that ended up in the discipline office. And we viewed their behavior maybe as bad behavior. And then we did the freeze, we did the flight folks. Those were the ones that ended up in the counselor's office. Those were the ones that we actually spoke to. And those were the ones I noticed felt so isolated and alone and that they were the only ones that felt this way. So back then, a lot of my work with students was just normalizing anxiety, letting them know they are not the only person in that class that feels that way. They are not the only person in the school that feels that way. Just making it a little more normal to them. Also, telling them you can learn the resources you need to have to address these feelings. And I can teach those to you. So let's get started. And that, at first, it's funny, I'm sure Crissy will probably say the same thing. When you first start working with a student with anxiety, they will tell you nothing's going to work. I've tried everything. Nothing's going to work. It's terrible and I can't do this. But slowing them down and helping them actually work through some things and emphasizing to them that you can learn these resources, you can learn these strategies, and they will help you. So that was kind of before COVID. Now I think that mental health issues have come to the forefront. I think that there's a lot more discussion about anxiety, stress, social emotional learning. There's more openness about this topic now. And depending on where you are in your state, your district, your school, of getting students back on your campus, my school that I was in until just about 2 months ago came back in August. Students came 2 days a week. We had one cohort here and one cohort there. Students were on my campus 2 days a week. I didn't see a lot of students then because they were in class. So a lot of the interventions I did with students were on the days they weren't in class, which meant it was a Zoom or it was a Teams meeting or it was a phone call, because we were trying to keep them in class as much as we could. But then as all students came back on campus, all students had anxiety. Yeah, everybody was a little concerned about, is it okay for me to be here? Does this feel quite right? So I think going forward, I think some of the common themes that we're going to see and the common ways that we're going to deal with this is that we're going to normalize it, and we're going to teach everyone how to deal with anxiety, because everyone can benefit from learning to slow their brains down, to slow their bodies down, and to just relax and try to trick their brain out of that circle thinking and get it on more productive things. Hopefully, as we go forward, there'll be a lot more discussion on this. It won't be something that students will be embarrassed to talk about, but something that they will be like, yep, that's me and I need help. I'm hopeful that that's what's going to happen in the future.
Well, Anna, you made a good point to say that some of it's very normalized. When I look on TV and I see Michael Phelps talking about his anxiety on TV and how he's gone to therapy and gotten help, it is much more normalized. So I think one of the themes we've seen is students expressing to us more that they're feeling anxious, when before some of those students, Mary, that you mentioned before, who maybe have just internalized all of it, finally feel some of that stigma is gone for them to say, okay, I can admit there's a pandemic and lots of people have anxiety. I'm going to go ahead, not just jump on the bandwagon, but I'm going to finally fess up that's me. I'm one of those people who's dealing with anxiety. And one thing that you touched on too, Anna, in terms of working with those students, is really, whether it's through Zoom or any kind of virtual platform, or whether it's in person, helping that student really feel heard. I think one thing we struggled with, and this is, I'm sure, across the board with all students being at home and our only opportunity to communicate was virtually, some students who maybe were dealing with anxiety kind of stopped being in touch with anyone. And that's been very scary on our end, to lose communication with those students who we know need those resources and need those connections. So kind of the before COVID, we could identify those students, at least from what we could see, but it's been very difficult, I think, in our seat to see those students who we know are dealing with anxiety and they're virtual and they're at home and they don't have any of the supports that they would normally have in place. And I think that's been a challenge for us as well.
Well, and I think, I'm just looking at the results of the poll that we asked the question about prioritizing items as we return to school in the fall, and the social emotional well-being by far is the top concern. And just before we began today, I shared with you in my morning's paper a lead story. The front page was "Pandemic Recovery Takes Emotional Toll on Teens." And again, it was just front and center about as we return to school, we don't necessarily, we can't make any assumptions. It's going to be critical that we know how everyone's doing, the students we're serving, as well as the educators serving them. That will be, I think, vital to the health and well-being of really starting the school year off on the right note.
Mary,
yeah.
Mary, I'm sorry, I was just going to jump in and say, I love that the question asks how we're going to help address the loss of learning during this school year, but that the responses really kind of say, guess what? It's still not our top priority. We know that our kids are academically behind from 2021, and they're probably still going to be behind 21-22. But unless we have them feeling like they have some kind of emotional well-being, none of that, the academics, attendance, it's not going to matter, because we're not going to be able to reach those students.
And, I think if we would all also reflect on our own learning experiences, we learn best when we feel connected and known. I think of all the experiences I've had over the years, and it's not that the content wasn't important, but it was really those relationships. So yeah, I think, and that leads Crissy to a question about, how can teachers, student support professionals, and administrators really now all work together to support the well-being of students? Like what are some recommendations and some of those practical tips you could offer?
I won't be naive and say you have to have buy-in from the entire school, because realistically, you're going to have people who are never going to buy in to what you're trying to sell as a school counselor. But that social emotional well-being of students, I think, has got to be key for all the players involved. So it's not just a school counselor's job. It's not just the teacher's job. It's not just the principal's job. I think different people can take different roles. For instance, we have a lot of students with anxiety who are terrified when it comes to presenting in class in front of their peers. And many of those students would just take a 0 and say, forget it. I'm just going to fail this project because I'm going to have to stand up in front of other people. So teachers can do simple things like provide an alternative assignment or give the student the opportunity to present individually to them after class during a planning period, lunchtime, where that student shows them that they have mastery of the content, but they're not having to deal with that other piece that they're being graded on without intentionally being graded on. So even teachers working with the school counselors and school counselors really collaborating with the teachers to help them understand what some of those symptoms might look like and what they may see in their class. I have 2 freshmen who just finished this year who had emergency passes on the back of their student IDs. And they had a working agreement with myself and their teachers that if they were feeling that they were having a panic attack and they were diagnosed with anxiety, to have the opportunity to engage in some different behaviors. One of those was they could take the emergency pass and come down to the counseling office, and they could choose to sit for 10 minutes because research will show you a panic attack doesn't last all day. It's going to crest at about 10 minutes and then be done in about 20 minutes. So the student can come down and sit, and then they can have the option to talk to the counselor if they want to, or if they just feel like they're past it, they can go back to class. Administrators can do a really great service to students with anxiety by having some safe places in the school and knowing that there can be a place to de-escalate, whether it's the counselor's office or even coming to a place in the main office that doesn't disrupt the classroom and everyone's learning, but that where the student is safe and accounted for. So I think the administration really kind of making sure that they're being aware of that. And then one of the biggest pieces is to just really make sure that people are not disciplining anxiety. Again, with the way it manifests itself with a lot of kids, if they're showing out in class or they are leaving the classroom. We get a lot of students who just walk out. They just say, I can't be in here. And that's that flight taking control over them to where they just say, I have to escape the situation, and they'll leave knowing they're going to get in trouble. But instead of disciplining that student for walking out of the classroom, they can work with the anxiety. And I think that's one of the really, really useful tools that working in the school setting that is really vital to that student having that communication, that trust, and that relationship with the adults in the building to where they know they're getting help and they're not being punished for something that they can't control.
Anna, do you have anything to add to that? I know that in the high school setting, if I'm remembering correctly, you had teams that you worked with to kind of, review things, and you did have the opportunity to work a bit with IntelliSpark, and what Crissy's describing to us is raising flags, and I'm just curious if you could share any insights into your practice.
Sure. One thing that was missing in on the supports that I had at the school level was just some way of keeping records on students that weren't academic records. I worked in a very large school, and I had 7 counselors, 2 career specialists. I mean, for us to stay on the same page was difficult. So when you add in all the teachers and all the students and all the administrators, Anna might be doing A for student number 1, an administrator might be doing B for student number 1, and the teacher might be doing C for student number 1, and we didn't know what each other was doing. And listen, we really tried to collaborate and work together. We really, and I know everybody else are going, I understand you. We really did try. But it's just with when you are in a school, that pace is so crazy fast. So we used IntelliSpark last year, and what that allowed us to do was now we had a software package that allowed us to all go in and see what has been done for that student. For example, if I had called home, I could go in and say, I called home about Crissy's behavior in class. Mom said, and then you could put in whatever you you thought was important for others to know. One thing I do like about IntelliSpark is there's different levels of oh, help me out, Mira, what's the word?
Maybe permissions?
Permissions, yes. So counselors and administrators had one level and teachers had another. So you can mark that was a very confidential note that you had in there, and it was only for you. So, but now school counselors, y'all remember, whatever you put in writing can always be subpoenaed. So just remember that. But it helped me. So the next time I went in, oh yeah, this is the student that this happened. But it also, let me use an example. First semester, a teacher found a breakthrough way of dealing with this particular student that no other teacher had found worked. Now, this was a special education student who also already had lots of support, but this teacher figured out something that worked. She was able to put that note in IntelliSpark, and then all the teachers the second semester said, hey, I tried this and it worked. So they already knew before that student even walked into their classroom that this teacher tried this with this particular student and it worked. We can do the same thing with anxiety. Part of our book is talking about how to build a student survival toolkit. And it's working with students to find out what strategies work for them to reduce their anxiety. And then they put it in a book or they put it in an electronic device, and they can pull that out and use it whenever they start to feel their anxiety creeping up. So if I know that a student needs just a moment to draw, I can put that in the notes and says the student may have some issues in your class. If they're allowed to draw for 2 minutes, they'll get right back on task. And those are notes that, in the perfect world, those things would be known from teacher to teacher and school to school and counselor to counselor. In that perfect world that we all think we live in, that would happen, but it just wasn't happening for us just because it's school and you're running in a million different directions. So I think I said all that to say this. IntelliSpark was a really good way to set alerts on students. So you are reminded to go back and check on them. For school counselors, it was a great way to put my notes in there, my very, very broad global notes on students, but even notes that said, I spoke to the stepmother today and she said this. The teachers might need to know that. And they're so appreciative when they hear that. So yes, that is a great way that I haven't found any other way to have everybody on one system so that they can all see the same services that have been offered to students.
Well, and I thank you for that, Anna, and it really goes back to what Crissy was describing about the understanding and bringing people together so that you're working in a coordinated manner. And with that, Crissy, I'm really curious about, fatigue and anxiety. So do you see fatigue setting in for students as a result of the anxieties that they deal with? And how might you help us think about addressing that? Because when someone is fatigued, they're not at their top ability to perform.
You're 100% just hitting the nail on the head. Fatigue is a huge part of anxiety, and kind of how you mentioned earlier, Anna, that the body just keeps going. Think about running a race, and when the race is over, the runners they jog in place a little bit and then they're done. For someone with anxiety, that race never stops, and they're running and running and running and never stopping, and their body is physically exhausted. Panic attacks, when people with anxiety have panic attacks, it is physically exhausting. It is emotionally exhausting, and that fatigue just sets in so many ways. It's not just physical fatigue, it's emotional fatigue, and then that inability to deal with anything because they're exhausted. And so we see students who are just showing that fatigue in person and virtually, who aren't doing their work. And they're not doing it because they're misbehaving or they're just being defiant. These are kids who are just exhausted, and their level of motivation has gone down immensely. So that lack of motivation really, really brings on a lot of that fatigue, that emotional fatigue, as well as the physical fatigue. So now that I've brought you all down with all the bad stuff, in working with those students, I think working in the here and now is really, really important, because if I tell a student, okay, I know you're exhausted, I know you have no motivation, I know that you're anxious and you don't want to do this work, but you've really got to do it, because if you don't get a good grade in this class, that's going to negatively impact your GPA, which will negatively impact your overall GPA, which will negatively impact your ability to go to college. Did I really just say that to an overwhelmed student? Because all I'm going to do is completely shut that student down. So as a counselor, or as someone in the education profession, I've really got to think about that student of what's going to help you right here, right now, to make it through this moment so that you can then have a little more clarity in the bigger picture. So I think just as solution-focused problem solvers, helpers, we're in the helping profession. We want to fix everything and we want to help everyone feel better. But that's not how anxiety works. And it's a process. Research shows medication, behavioral cognitive therapy are the two best ways in combination to treat anxiety. But when you've got a student who is not treated, who doesn't see a counselor, or maybe is not communicating with the school counselor to learn those techniques that Anna was talking about of working through those specific strategies and techniques that work for that anxious student, they're not going to be motivated. They're going to be tired. So it's our job to meet them where they are, let them know that they are safe and that they're heard, and that we are going to work with them step by step rather than big picture, we've got to get through this grade. What do we need to do to help you feel okay today? And then we move on from there to the next day. And it takes a lot. And I think as school counselors, that's why Anna and I were originally getting into self-care for school counselors, because that is a huge emotional burden on the helper, whether it's the teacher, administrator, school counselor, school psych, whoever that person is. It's the weight of the world on your shoulders. So that self-care is important. But I always try to step back and think, I don't have that additional set of anxious worries on my shoulders that are adding on to that. So how do I help that student just take a piece of that off today? We're not lifting the whole Atlas world off of that student. We're just trying to help them figure out ways to carry it and then maybe eventually work to unload it.
Well, that's very helpful. And I think we can all agree from even this conversation that, COVID-19 has really exacerbated what we're seeing with mental health for students, anxiety and fatigue. And I'd love to hear from you, Anna, but also Crissy, as we're thinking about this return in the fall, and I think with the hope that it will be in person to the best of our abilities, what would you encourage educators, school counselors, teachers, administrators to really be keeping in mind, related to the support and well-being of their students and of themselves?
Right, because I'm also concerned about the adults in the building. But I think the first thing I want everyone to hear is that anxiety looks different in each person. You may look at a student, we've said this before, and not realize that there's something going on the inside. So in August, when everyone returns, we're hoping, in my mind, that's going to be a great day. And we're all going to celebrate. And we're all going to just throw our hands in the air. We're all going to hug each other. It's going to be wonderful. That's in my mind, because that's Anna's idea of a great day. That is not Crissy's idea. It might be. But, that's not everybody's idea of a great day. There's going to be students who, as they come back, they're not going to want to celebrate being back. They might not like the big, I think, it's going to be like Walt Disney World. Well, Walt Disney World's not for everybody. It's a great place, but it's not for everybody. What are we going to do for the students who may have even more anxiety because they're coming back? I think, because as I talk with parents and friends and people, just colleagues, everybody thinks that that's going to be a happy, happy day when we all get to go back to school. And for Anna, that's going to be a happy, happy day. But it might not be that way for everyone. So I just want to remind everybody that it's not, you're going to have a lot of different reactions to coming back to school in August. And because of that, I would like to encourage everyone to start thinking about how their school is going to address the feelings of anxiety, stress with everybody. Make it a school-wide theme. Make it a school-wide practice in your classroom. Make it a part of your classroom routine. That when students get into your classroom, okay, everybody sit down, put both feet on the floor, look at me, and let's all breathe in, and let's all breathe out. You can start class like that every day, and that could become a part of your routine. I love the fact that the strategies that we've put in the book are strategies anybody can teach and anybody can do. So a classroom teacher, an administrator, a counselor, a social worker that works in a school can pick that up and work with students, because everyone can learn these strategies. And even though, that kid over there might not think they need to know that strategy, and they might not need to know that strategy that day, but in 10 years they might. So let's normalize it. Let's teach everyone how to address it. And let's make it a school-wide focus that all of our students are known, all of our students are appreciated, and they're all supported by all of the adults in the building.
All right, I'm going to piggyback on that, because you said I wanted to comment on every single thing you were saying, because I was cheering you on that stuff I'm thinking about. One thing that I think is going to be really important is the education piece for the adults in the building. And again, you touched on our book actually has a really good section on defining what anxiety is and isn't. So knowing the difference between stress and anxiety, and really helping the people in the building that are going to be around these students, knowing what to look for and to be aware of what things are and aren't, so that we all are working with the same vocabulary and the same working knowledge of this is how we help our students' social emotional well-being. So that's one really important piece, just starting off the school year. And I think practical strategy wise, one thing we're doing at my school, I work at a high school, and we have students who are starting 10th grade. Our high school is 9 through 12, but we have students that are going to be starting 10th grade in August who would never set foot in our school. So it's like they're brand new students. So it could be simple things that you're thinking about, such as maybe hosting a new student orientation, not just for students that are transitioning from pre-K to kindergarten or 5th to 6th grade or junior high, however your schools are split up, but maybe pulling in students that have been virtual for the last year or want the opportunity to just step foot on campus again before they do it with 2,200 other students. So it could be little things like that. Other pieces, like Anna said, are taking care of the adults in the building, and that's making sure that the staff in the building understands how to engage in their own social emotional well-being, because it is certainly not going to help an anxious student to sit down in the classroom and have a teacher burst into tears in front of them because they're dealing with their own anxiety. So really making sure that the adults are taking care of themselves so that they can then go on to do the jobs they're supposed to do and support those students. It's a really big challenge, I think, as school counselors and other professionals, that we have to have our game face on, and it's almost like we're not allowed to emote and feel or be anxious or nervous or worried. We have the right to feel those feelings, but kids are looking to us to be that rock and to be the steady person. We can be human, and our emotions are humanized, but to still be that resource for that student, we've got to have that in place. So that's another really important piece as well. And again, one other thing is that not everybody's going to return to in-person learning. The school district I work in has students who are going to remain online next year, and you might be working in a district where you have some students who will be online, some who will be in person. Our online and virtual opportunities for some of our anxious students was like giving them a Christmas present, because now they don't have to face all of those stressors at school and all of those stressors that are just the triggers for their anxiety. And many of those kids, if given the opportunity, aren't going to set foot in the school again. They're going to stay virtual and online. So you're going to need to make sure that you're helping those students as well, because they may be some of the ones who need it the most. And they can slip through the cracks really easily because they're not in front of you every day. But some of those students are the ones that we really don't need slipping through the cracks.
Well, I really appreciate your time this afternoon, and I want to just urge all of our attendees. I know that information about contacting Crissy and Anna has been shared in the chat, and they're both very willing to hear from you directly. So please keep that in mind. If we're coming up here at the top of the hour pretty soon, and I do want to let both Anna and Crissy offer any sort of final encouragement to the group, and then also let you all know, should you be going to the ASCA conference in July, you have a presentation there. So it would be an opportunity for any of you in this virtual meeting that will be there to meet them in person. But Anna, just, a brief closing from you, and Crissy from you.
Mary, I appreciate this opportunity very much. You can tell we're kind of passionate about this. But I'm also quite passionate about our attendees that watch this today. The adults in the building have to be okay. So let me tell you, y'all are doing a great job. Hang in there. Your students are learning from watching you deal with very difficult situations, and boy, they're learning from experts here. So just keep it up. Next year's got to be better, right? And Lord help us when we can finally start planning ahead with some certainty. That'll be a great, great day. But I just want you to know how important you are to the students in our nation, and how important you are to me and Crissy as well. So keep it up. Keep up the good work.
And I'll add to that think about what you're doing at 5:54 p.m. on June 30th when your school year is done.
Yes.
You are taking this opportunity to try to learn ways to help your students. So you already have half that battle won. You've got the buy-in, and you know that this is what's going to help students. And I would just stress, like Anna stresses, first of all, thank you for caring, because you might be that one person in that student's life that is going to be the force that helps them learn these strategies, and they take those with them the rest of their lives, and they use them. And so that's not meant to say that as a burden on you, but an opportunity for you to change lives, because that's why you're in this profession, and that's why you're in education in general. So thank you very much. The other part of that is also making sure you take care of yourself. While you are so wonderful to do this at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, go eat ice cream tonight. Go take care of yourself. Go do whatever it is that makes you happy. That's legal and okay to do. Tomorrow's night, but take care of yourselves, because you have to be refreshed and refueled, recharged in order to go be those wonderful people that you are for these students. And we're excited to present in Las Vegas at our professional national conference. If you are a school counselor and you're attending, one big piece, we're going to share some of what you heard today, but we're also going to be talking about how you are reaching your students virtually. So if you're someone who has students that are going to be virtual learning, or if you're a virtual counselor, we're going to have some other ideas as well. So that session will include that as well. Shameless plug.
Well, and I know my colleague just shared again the link for the book, and just a reminder, should we invite any of you, if you haven't joined IntelliSpark, to join us, and then we would love to enter your name in a drawing for a copy of this great resource. So with that, I just want to offer a big thank you to Crissy and Anna and all of you that attended. and I want to take this opportunity to wish you a wonderful 4th of July. So have a great rest of the summer, and just thank you so much.